Joining me on stage is James Vanderbilt, who is the writer and the director of Nuremberg. Michael Shannon, who plays Justice Jackson. Rami Malek, who plays Douglas Kelly, the psychiatrist. And Leo Woodall, who plays Howard Treist. And as I said, James. And the one person who obviously isn't here tonight is Russell Crowe. And that was an extraordinary performance that he's given. And, how challenging was it for him in a sense?
Yeah, no, and I know he's sorry he can't be here tonight. We all love him, and I think he's tremendous in the film. I can only sort of go off of what he said about it. But one of the things he told me very early on was that he read the script and playing the part scared him, and that's kind of what excited him.
Yeah.
I sort of feel the same. It's sort of you look at something and if it makes you nervous to do it, maybe that's a good reason to try and do it. But he, came on to attached himself to the film. It's an independent film. So we had no financing, we had no money, and he attached himself in 2019 off of the script, which was a great gift to me. And that helped us get to where we were. And I know that it was, he said early on when we were in pre-production, because Russell is, and this is pretty well known, a fairly social guy. And a drink with Russell Crowe is never a bad evening. And I remember him saying to me, I'm not going to be that social on this movie because I'm going to have to go to some fairly dark places to play this character. But I was just so struck by his commitment to it and his lack of vanity in doing it, and just there's nothing I would ask him to do that he wouldn't do. And I mean, I think like all of these actors up there, I think he has nothing really left to prove, and yet all of these guys, and Russell included, attacked it like they had everything to prove, and that is such a gift to a director.
James, I had
Conversations I had with Russell drinking every evening.
Oh, so I just wasn't invited. Okay, that's fair.
When did you come across this story? How did you encounter it? And was it an immediate, yes, this needs to be done?
It was very immediate. It was 13 years ago. In 2012, I knew a writer named Jack L. High, who had written a book called The Lobotomist that we were trying to adapt into a TV series. And he called me up and he said, I'm working on something new, and I have a book proposal for it. And it was only about 5 or 6 pages. But would you take a look at it? And I said, absolutely. And I read those 5 or 6 pages, and it was the fastest I said yes to anything in my life. It was incredible. And it was the story of Rami's character, Douglas Kelly, and how he came into as a U.S. Army psychiatrist who was thought he was going home at the end of World War II, but instead was sent to Morndorf and got to the Grand Hotel there. And a U.S. colonel was sitting there and said, okay, upstairs we have the entire surviving Nazi high command, everyone who hasn't killed themselves, who we've captured, and your job is to evaluate them to see if they can stand trial for their crimes.
And I was interested because there have been a number of previous attempts to tackle the Nuremberg trials, and I wondered whether you'd seen them, what you took from them, because I think it's safe to say yours, I would argue, is the most successful to date in terms of being both historically accurate, kind of narratively very compulsively driven, and with an amazing cast of literal and figurative characters in it. So I just was interested whether you decided not to look at the others, you knew the others, or you learned from them.
No, I knew the others. I'm an enormous fan of Stanley Kramer's masterpiece, Judgment at Nuremberg, which is a different story. It takes place about 3 or 4 years later, when the trials were sort of people didn't care about them anymore,
Yeah.
and that's why they needed to recruit Spencer Tracy to come and be the judge. And this is the story of the first trial, and this is the one I think that was for them the most important, because if this trial didn't work,
Yeah.
there would be no trials to come. So I felt like it was a subject that I thought I knew a lot about, and then when I started researching it, I quickly realized how little I knew about it, and it was that was what's so exciting about doing it.
And also 13 years ago, we're in a very different place. I'd wondered how long it had taken you, but I mean, the world is in a very different place now.
Yes.
To 13 years. So it's a very prescient. Now, I wanted to ask each of you, the cast, that what was it about each of your roles that you found perhaps most fascinating or most challenging? Michael, do you want to?
Well, I wasn't familiar with the Robert Jackson beforehand, so I was very honored to get the opportunity to learn more about him. The more I learned about him, the more I was in awe of not just what he did in this instance, but his whole career. Yeah, I was fascinated to learn that he never actually finished law school, and yet he was a Supreme Court justice. I think that just speaks to his tenacity as a person. Yeah, considering the current state of our Supreme Court, I was kind of hoping that maybe they'll watch the film and get, although there is a Justice Jackson right now that I'm quite fond of, which I find kind of ironic, I guess.
Yeah. Rami.
I too watched Judgment at Nuremberg, and I was a Montgomery Clift fan as well. It's a great film. I agree, more accurate, and I thought I knew a lot about the trials. I did not know that there was a psychiatrist tasked with discovering whether these men were fit for trial and compos mentis, and I thought that was just fascinating, and I found it even more uniquely fascinating that he became enamored and enchanted by Hermann Goring, and you could see how an entire group of citizens and even further beyond that latched on to certain ideas and beliefs because of men who had a certain power and charm, and I thought that would be an incredibly complex character to take on.
Yeah.
And go face to face with, of course, Russell Crowe, who I thought was just excellently cast. Because he does, it's hard to evade that man's charisma in a jail cell. And then tether that together with the story of the trials they could have been two disparate films. The fact that they're woven together so perfectly speaks so highly to your work, James.
And Leo, I was thinking, because if you don't know about Nuremberg, which I didn't until I properly read the book, you would imagine that your character was a kind of a plot device, but it's not. Treese was there as well. So for you, what was it about his character that was?
Well, Howard Trieste, I have learned that he would have actually kind of hated being called Howie. And he was an extraordinary man. He had an extraordinary story. I think it's from an acting point of view, aside from, being sort of sandwiched between Rami Malek and Russell Crowe, it was a really sort of interesting and kind of, very challenging thing to have this huge secret, this kind of double life, this identity that he had to keep completely secret and not give anything away.
Which you're not doing right now, which is good.
We see the
Thanks,
great
Ronnie.
thing about historical films, particularly accurate ones, is most of the punchline we know. We don't have to give too many things. But I can well imagine. I was going to say there was, because this trial was so covered, film, recording, and there's such a wealth of information. I was interested to know what all of you went to. What were your sources? What did you find most useful, if any of it, in all of this documentation about the trial and particularly Michael and Rami, your characters?
Well, Russell, very early on, said, "Oh, I have a book I want to give you," and he had it sent from Australia to give it to me in Budapest, and it was the transcript of the examination between Jackson Goring, and it's very thick. The actual testimony took several days and was very meticulous and detail oriented. I'm glad we didn't have to try and perform all of it, because as enamored as people seem to be by the version that's in the film, just the length of it, it was actually much longer. But yeah, there's a beautiful website actually devoted to Robert Jackson and his legacy that anyone can stumble upon quite easily. So I started there, and then I got hold of a biography about him, and pretty typical stuff. Yeah.
It's an incredible read, and I thought if there was a script that could come close to matching that, we'd be in good shape. And I think, not to pit anyone against each other, but it either matches or surpasses it in your word. James so kindly gave me a version, well, one of, it seems the only existing copies of 22 Cells in Nuremberg, written by Douglas Kelly. And I was fascinated by how at times it could be, his description of those men could be very dry and cold, and then he could have, I mean, it was clinical, but he would describe them as perfectly ordinary men, and in all their characteristics, as you could go across this room and describe anyone here. And I think, that's inherent in what you discover through his exploration of evil, that these were ordinary men plunged into a certain circumstance that, given the right political climate at the right time, could happen to anyone and any group of people in history. And I think that was quite alarming to him, something he tried to dispel to the masses throughout his life. But I also wanted to make sure that, that was a discovery he had later on in life. So I think what I learned the most is that in the moment, he was just trying to do his job. He was just trying to see if these men were fit for trial. And at times, he was charmed. He was enamored. He was intoxicated by these men, especially Hermann Goering. And I found that really complex and fascinating, and there's a wealth of research, but a lot came from that book.
It is in the film, and when you learn about the trial, the cast of characters, the cast of people there are extraordinary. And I was interested to know, were there people that you were sad to not include?
Oh, that's a great question. There were so many stories,
Yeah.
around it, because it is, to speak to what these gentlemen are saying as well, is just, this trial was built to be documented.
Yeah.
They rebuilt the courtroom in order to put microphones in, and they put lights hanging from the ceiling that were so bright that they issued sunglasses to the courtgoers so that the film cameras could have enough exposure to record it. So it was incredibly well documented. You can watch the trial on YouTube to this day. So there was such a wealth of information, and there were so many fantastic stories around it. One of my favorites is about the Schulberg brothers, who were the ones who put together the film that was screened in the courtroom of the concentration camps. and what they went through, and how John Ford hired them to come over and do this. Bud Schulberg, one of the brothers, wrote What Makes Sammy Run, which is kind of a seminal Hollywood novel back then, and everything they did to build that film. There's a great documentary called Filmmakers for the Prosecution about their efforts. But you come across these things and they're great stories, but you just sort of go, I wish, but I don't have time for that, and so I mean, I think you could make so many films about this period of time, and we chose to make this one, which I'm very proud of. But yeah, it's an incredible time.
And it is an incredible cast of characters, all of you. And I was intrigued to know, if you could have swapped out yours and taken somebody else's in the alternative version, was there a character that any of you have gone, actually, I'd have to try and get my teeth into that one?
No.
Very diplomatic.
No.
Oh.
Yes. No.
No, I was going to ask James, because I think as somebody watching the film, one of the things that's very brave, I think, about the film is the humanization of these characters and of the perpetrators, particularly Goring. And I wanted to ask you, James, whether you think a film like this would have been possible to be made.
I mean, I think brave is the right word, actually, if I may say. I think it's a very bold thing to do, because I think I found myself wondering exactly that, thinking this willingness to portray Goring as a real person who's capable of compassion, care, love, tenderness, exactly as you describe it, Rami. He's able to bring people, intelligent, educated people, into his orbit, and to be bold enough to show that is something which I think there has been a tendency to be quite reticent to do. It's a lot easier, it's a lot more comfortable for all of us to assume that the Nazis were somehow apart from the rest of us, almost as if they had a separate genetic identity that meant that we could never step across the Rubicon and occupy the same space. And I think for that reason, we could look at some great films that have tackled the Second World War and some great films that have tackled the Holocaust. And in all of them, by and large, the perpetrators are quite a specific idiom. There's a reluctance to let them become fully formed human beings. And one of the things I found about this film particularly is that Goring is a likable character. He's gregarious and fun, and clearly people are drawn towards him. And acknowledging that seems to me such a critical thing. So obviously that's at the center of the film's thesis, but it's also in its essence too. I think the performances just do a phenomenal job of just kind of embedding this energy in the film that brings these ideas through, so that the text has something to say, but it's about more than that. It's not just about what you hear, it's about how you feel as you're encountering it, which is a really impressive thing to do. And I do wonder if there is something to do with the fact that it is 80 years, that we're generationally, we're moving on. Geopolitically, obviously, we're in quite a challenging time at the moment, and this film confronts us in a way which is very difficult and very challenging, and frankly quite unnerving, which I think is exactly what it should do.
Absolutely. And James, I mean, for very obvious reasons, there aren't that many female characters in the film, but one who's very strong is Goring's wife, Emmy. And I was interested, because the audience is left very much to make up their own minds about her. You're not very directional, but I wondered whether you had any conclusions yourself about her culpability, her relationship. I mean, in a sense, I didn't know whether you had a stronger sense, because I think it was good that we as an audience were left to percolate it ourselves.
Yes, no, I mean, in terms of conclusions, I mean, historically, it was she and Eva Braun were kind of competing with each other to be sort of First Lady of the Reich, and there was a competition there. And certainly she enjoyed the perks of that position. Adolf Hitler was the best man at their wedding. So I think certainly she was committed and all in, but also she was a mother and she was a wife. And I think, going off of what James said too, one of the things that was, interesting to explore is that these people are people. They do love their spouses the same way we love our spouses. They love their children the same way we love our children. None of that excuses the crimes that were committed, but for me, it actually makes them more terrifying, because it's not Darth Vader.
Yeah.
It's not, it's humans who did these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rami, I was going to say, as an actor, what did you find? Because yours is I mean, I think what's interesting about both Justice Jackson and your character Kelly is they're quite morally complex characters, I think. And I just wondered for you, what did you find most interesting or perhaps challenging in that in his personality? That
I think it speaks to your point and not only as in the portrayal, but just and taking the role on in and of itself is the concern that I would be seen as a Nazi sympathizer. That was quite taxing, and then I had to step outside of myself and think, okay, this is a role. It's a role. It's going to be a challenging role. You're going to have to be enamored by someone who is an extremely toxic human being as seen by history, though you will have to empathize with him. You will see that this man is charming. He is intoxicating. He I mean, especially off of his medication, he became even that much more bright. So it was, I'm sure Douglas, I know this, was just fascinated, and I imagine eager to go into those cells day in and day out, as he wanted to be at the top of his profession. He was extremely ambitious, and I think that was a goal of his throughout his life, was to do something that no one else had done, and even to write a book about it. So there's that element of having certain motives, but trying to maintain a sense of integrity. Also knowing that you're charged with a certain task by uh, the brass above, but um, at the end of the day, I just had to look at it as a role, and like you said, it's something that terrified me, and those things I'm absolutely drawn to. Yeah, that was it. It's just an incredibly complex character, and I tried not to think about the aftermath of what was going to happen to this human being as he probably tried to reconcile how much empathy he had in those moments, but um, it's it's fascinating, even sitting in the cinema watching it, which I don't normally do, but I really wanted to sit with a British audience last night, uh, especially around this time of year, and feel the visceral reaction. And to speak to that, usually in film, when we're shooting in a space that's so small as these cells are, and Eve Stewart, our production designer, had built them to scale. James Vanderbilt and our prolific cinematographer, Darius Wolski, had this idea ahead of time that we weren't going to remove a wall to bring in a camera, which you would. So we brought the cameras in, the camera assistants, the microphones that worked were onto. No, I'm just kidding. The boom mics were in. I mean, it was a claustrophobic setting, and that was fascinating to be in there with Leo and to be staring at the face of Russell playing Goring. And there would be moments where you were, grinning ear to ear, and then there would be visceral, tense moments where you'd want to, rip each other's heads off, and I mean, we'd be screaming at each other. We'd be silently but violently whispering into each other's ears. I could see sweat coming down his face. He'd make my heart pound at times, and we were just trying to hide it from one another. So there was this cat and mouse game throughout that I think was probably very exhilarating and adrenalizing for Douglas and myself.
Yeah. Because actually, Michael, I wondered for you as well, because the courtroom is so beautifully reconstructed, so such detail and care went into it, and I wondered whether that was was that was that a benefit? Did that affect your performance? Did it to be in that space as Justice Jackson?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I had the lovely opportunity to have a moment to myself in there before it was filled with tables and chairs and people that you see in the film. I loved that little section where I'm just spending time in there by myself, trying to build up my fortitude, or war game it in my head, imagine what it's going to be like. And but I have to say, one of the main sources for inspiration doing the scene or the scenes were the extras, the Hungarian extras. Hungary had really been through the ringer during that century, first because of the Nazi invasion, and then the communist, and the people that were there, all of them probably at some point in their family line, somebody had been affected by these events. And not all of them spoke English so well, but their attention to what was happening was above and beyond what you typically see from, extras. They were really invested in it. And that put a great deal of wind in my sails. Yeah.
And Leo,
And usually, sorry to add
No.
if we have time, but you'd break these scenes up into pieces because it's 20 minutes of dialogue. But you can speak to this if you don't mind as to how you decided to shoot that.
Yeah, no, we the climax of the film is, or one of the climaxes of the film is the cross-examination between Herman Goring and Robert Jackson. And as scripted, it was about 22 pages. And our first AD, who's responsible for breaking up the days, sort of said, okay, here's the plan. We're going to shoot this over 3 days. The first day we'll do the first third, second day we'll do the second third. And Michael and Russell both went, oh no, we don't want to do that. We want to do all of it. There's no exit ramp for this scene. This is a fight. This is a verbal gunfight, the back and forth. And, the idea of shooting 6 pages and then going to sleep and then coming back 12 hours later and trying to find the way to do it. They weren't interested in it at all, and neither was I. And I think we gave her and the producers a heart attack with that decision. But what ended up happening was, with this 300 extras, we set up 4 cameras, 2 on Michael, 2 on Russell, and with Richard E. Grant as well as part of the scene. We ran 25-minute takes, and they were word perfect. And at the end of the first take, all of those extras stood up and applauded. And it is one of the most incredible days I've ever had on a film set. I don't think I'll ever be able to shoot a 25-minute take again. And these guys were incredible and tore each other to shreds. And had to do it 50 feet away from each other because of the way the courtroom was truly laid out.
Yeah.
Jackson and Goring were about 50 feet away from each other. And also, most courtroom scenes, the prosecutor or the attorney questioning gets to walk around. Tom Cruise gets to move from here to here. Jack Nicholson is there. We move here. Camera goes here. There are breaks in it. And because of the true Nuremberg courtroom and the way it was wired, Jackson stayed at the lectern the entire time. So you have 2 actors 50 feet away from each other. Neither can move, who for 25 minutes have to go at each other. And it is riveting. It's stunning work. So at the end of the first take, I had to remember to call cut because I was just watching, and then I went, oh no, I'm in charge. Cut. Okay.
But I think that's a really interesting thing to hear, because I think there is that sense of intimacy and focus and closeness in that scene. You do feel how intimate the courtroom was, and packed in a way that, it's kind of amazing. Leo, I wanted to ask you because the film really explores inevitably the capacity for human evil. But I think through your character, we also look at the capacity for human good, which is amazing. And I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, how you feel about the decisions that your character made along the way, because I think it's very powerful, the journey that your character takes.
He had a great desire for revenge, and he, you know, there's an opportunity, for him to get a little taste of it when Julius Stryker, who he had the most hatred for, he had an opportunity to get some of that back, and he chose humility, he chose care, he chose peace, effectively, and he may have only sort of learned that about himself in the moment. I don't know, but it's certainly a really important message, I think, that
Yeah.
he sends in that moment to people in general.
Yeah. And I think to James's point, it also puts us as the viewer into that position of we too make choices. We can choose which way we go. And I think it's a very powerful moment. And I'm conscious of the time, so at the end of the film, Rami, it's left open as to whether it was Kelly, because there is some supposition that it was Kelly who might have provided Goring with the cyanide. Do you have a theory on that one?
Yes, all right. Do I have a theory? No. I mean, I think when you, I am to understand that you haven't seen the film, correct? No one has seen. Has anyone seen the film? If they have, raise their hand. Okay, great. In that case, no, I will leave this to your own devices to figure out exactly how this goes. But let's all have a conversation about it afterwards.
So that's it. I think the other thing that I was really struck by, and I'm sure everybody was, and James and I were talking about it, is the role that film plays in the film and in the trial. I mean, it was groundbreaking. It was the first time that film was admitted as evidence. It was the first time that the trial itself was filmed. And it's obviously the way that it was received. And I was fascinated to find that German children at school were forced to, an hour every day, discuss the trial each day, and that sense of the film being able to kind of go out to the world. But you as a director also use film in a really interesting way. There's the scene with Hess, which has that kind of Kodachrome sort of kind of extraordinary feel to it. You move in and out of actual archive film, you recreating in black and white as if it's archive film, the actual film. And I just wondered, in a sense, for you, what you feel film can do that, say, TV can't, or in a sense, and why that foregrounding of film was so important for you in this film.
I think, and I love film. I love cinema. I love movies. I've always been a movie person, and I love television. I watch television, but I've really only worked in film, and one of the reasons I wanted to make this film was I think there's such a power in telling stories through this medium, and you can read the histories, and you can watch the documentaries, and you can learn the facts and figures, but I think nothing, there's no substitute for the emotion that cinema can take you on, and one of the reasons I wanted to tell this way, it's interesting. I've gotten the question a lot, sort of over this tour, about what's such a big story. So I mean, a limited series. You could have done, an episode about Jackson, and then an episode about Kelly, and maybe I'm dumb, but it never occurred to me, because I just think there's such a power in experiencing this on a big screen, but through the eyes of these characters and through the emotional story of what they go through. And I think similarly, the way film was used in the trial was everyone had heard rumors and heard stories, and it had been printed in the papers what had happened in the camps. But until you're confronted with those images, you don't internalize it in the same way. And that's why we do use the real films in our film, because I do want to put you in that moment 80 years ago of being someone sitting in that courtroom experiencing those images as the world did for the first time.
But the sequence with the Hess
Oh,
graphic
sorry, yes.
is fascinating because
Yes.
in a sense it's very overt. You're very
Yes.
aware of it as a piece of
Yes.
with a different tone.
Yes, we're a little undercranked. We're moving a little faster, and it's a little bit of, and that came out of my conversations with Darius Wolski, our incredible DOP. And just when you hear Hess's story of how he left in 1942 and flew the plane over and crashed and then got beat up by farmers, and then all of that stuff, it struck us as uh, this incredible comedy of errors, like all of these things that went wrong. You know what I mean? And some of it, I think, was taking the curse off of these men. These men, not all of them were very bright. Not all of them were, again, Darth Vader masterminds. And so, that he decided that he had amnesia, and then said, no, 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 I was faking, and then said, no, 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 I was faking about faking. I really have amnesia. It just was this, it struck us as very darkly funny. And so we wanted to sort of portray it in that way, and use sort of the filmmaking techniques of the time, because our film, I think, is shot in a very classical but modern way, because we want it to be accessible to modern audiences. But that was our opportunity to kind of indulge in sort of an old style filmmaking and oversaturate and undercrank and tell that story.
Before I come to a final question to all of you, I just also wanted to ask, I thought it was very interesting that depictions of death in the film, it's very restrained, it's very considered, it's largely absent. But I was interested to know why you felt it was important to show the hangings.
I thought it was very important to show the hangings, and first of all, I think that it's not a fun way to die. Not that there is a fun way to die, but it is, rudimentary. They did all of the trials were in public and filmed, but the hangings weren't, and so we had to go off of firsthand accounts of people who were there. There was also a part of me that said, if we're going to show films from the camps, we're not going to show the death of the Nazi, and not that one equates the other, but it felt like, and also, quite frankly, just in terms of Howie's story and the conclusion of where he ends up, you can't leave that out. You have to portray that, in all of its messiness. I think there's so much death in film that's very clean and neat, and sometimes in entertainment that's fine. I've made films where it is, but with this film, I thought it was important to show death as not clean and neat.
Lastly, we've been very lucky. I mean, over the last year, we've hosted Sam Mendes, Steve McQueen, who both obviously made two fantastic films around the Second World War. And both of them were very clear that they were making these films to tell these stories to their children. And I was really interested to know why, for each of you, why you feel this story is so important now, why you wanted to make it, in a sense, for now.
I'll just very quickly, as I hadn't heard that. It was the same for me. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II, and so it felt like a time I could reach out and touch. And when I talk to my children about that period of time, it feels like I'm talking about, the American Civil War. It's so far away. And so that's really fascinating that they had that answer too.
Well, I think I have a theory that it's because for I would just say people of my age, that I was a child when I could speak to people who were adults in the war. And as an adult, I could only speak to people who were children during the war. And we're at a funny transition, I think.
I think that's absolutely true.
How do we pass this on?
Yeah.
Michael, for you.
Well, I just think Jackson is an example of somebody who had the audacity to believe that the impossible could be accomplished. I think there are a lot of people nowadays who perhaps aren't entirely happy with the state of the world, and there's a certain sense of powerlessness or despair or whatnot that even though they don't accept things the way they are, they don't feel there's an ability to change them. And I think Jackson is an example of that you can do something if you choose to. It may not be easy. It may come at a sacrifice to yourself. And a lot of times that's associated with, fighting the war and the sacrifice that soldiers make on the battlefield. But there are other kinds of sacrifices that can be made too. And even though they may not cost you your life, they are of equal value. Like Jackson says, this war will end in a courtroom, and this war started because of laws, and that's how it's going to end. And thank God, that law exists, that there is a rule of law at all. It could be maddening at times, and it doesn't always work because we're fallible as people, but it's worth preserving, it's worth leaning into, it's worth using, and it shouldn't, just disappear entirely.
Rami, for you.
I really appreciate what you said about the Howie's character and the response you can have as an audience member in every direction, both directions. It can be could be a very polarizing film, but you'll feel so many things coming out of it. And I think there are people who are so affected by it that I think you need to take a long walk sometimes after seeing something like this. It resonates. It entertains, of course, but it will resonate. And I had that feeling early on in my career being cast in a World War II miniseries, The Pacific, that Tom Hanks and Spielberg produced. And I spent a year abroad, just kind of didn't know how to do anything but method act at that point. And it, doing a Marine boot camp and being in an Amtrak, hitting a beach and explosions going off was just an experience that was unlike any other. And after a year of that, I walked away thinking, I don't think I ever want to act again. That was enough. But if that was 0.0.01% of what those guys had gone through, I thought, okay, I have the ability to help share that story with generations to come. And they ended up showing that in schools at times. So I thought that was useful, and perhaps this could be something that has its own legacy onward. Well after we're on this planet. So just something that I would be proud of, and that was much bigger than me as an actor.
Leah.
There's not a whole lot I can add to what the gentleman has said. I think it's important people see it because, the film speaks to the fact that we all make choices and we are all accountable for those choices, and we will be held accountable and should be held accountable for those choices. And I was speaking to someone the other day who reminded me that there's only a small number of people who are still living who lived through it. Quite soon, there's not going to be anyone alive who was there, and so it's of course, it will never be forgotten through relatives and bloodlines, and but it's still important that Jamie made this film to really prove that we won't forget.
Yeah. And James, as a Holocaust historian, for you, and also as a viewer of the film.
I was just thinking as they were talking, what Michael just said there is so powerful. Actually, the Jackson's centrality in the process and the role that one person can have. But as you were talking too, I was thinking about the fact that one of the things about the trial which is so significant is they were acting in the moment, but also actively shaping history. They knew that they were at this hinge point between what had gone before and what was going to come next. And there was this whole, you see it in the transcripts, this determination to use the trial to kind of reshape a better future. And obviously, whether or not that bit has proved to be successful, who knows? But surely we can take something from the fact that when Jackson was standing making his opening speech, he was shouting into the unknown. He was shouting into an unknowable future. But 80 years later, we're sitting on a stage here talking to these people in London based on a huge film about this history. And hopefully we can take something from that. I mean, hopefully there's some gratification, or there would be some gratification for that small group of people in that small courtroom in that tiny little corner of Germany in 1945 into 1946, to know that people would still be talking, and not just talking loudly and publicly and widely about what they sought to do.
I agree. And I think, it's an incredibly powerful film. It's and it's very powerfully told. And I think it is very timely for what it is trying to say. And I think its complexity and its humanity and the fact that so much is left open and left for the audience to sit with and think about for themselves is a real achievement. And thank you. Thank you for making the film. Thank you, James, Michael, Rami, Leo, James, for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.